Hello everyone, welcome back to SwitchUp and to the episode where we have a look at some interesting games. Now, first things first, apologies for any audio issues. We're having to record in a hotel room and it's quite possibly the echoiest place ever.
Echoiest.
Difficult, is that a real word?
I'm not sure. Has the most echo, I'll go with. I think that's the best way to say it. But yes, we are at Gamescom this week, so we've had to do a fair few videos in this hotel room and it's been a bit of a nightmare, I'm afraid, so apologies for that. But in terms of this video, we're going to look at 6 games that we've been playing over the last few weeks and let you know a bit about them. So what have we been playing? Well, let's find out. Right, I'll start us off then with the game that I was playing on the plane to get over here to Germany and was playing the week before that when I was on holiday. This is Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which came out a while ago now, didn't it? But I played a tiny bit of it then and then kind of moved on to other things.
Yeah, this one did look really interesting. I think we got Aston to review it for us, just because it was one of those busy weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, he reviewed it for us, and then I got it for either a birthday or something from the wife, very close to that review. I did play a bit of it, but just busy reviews, what have you, I had to put it down. And ironically, I was playing something else whilst on holiday on the beach and just couldn't see it. The sun was so bright, I couldn't see the screen, so I had to look through the games I'd brought and find something that would be nice and colourful to be able to see the screen, and this fit the bill perfectly. But apart from that, just, you know, it's a very good game. It's a 3D platform mod, and the quirk, the mechanic here is that, as well as the normal moves that Kirby has, he can suck up objects and kind of become them. For example, he can become a set of stairs, and then you'll use those stairs to reach higher platforms, or he can take in a lot of water and then use those to get rid of goo or fire, to make his way across stages. So you have these almost like set piece sections where you become something large.
That's funny, isn't it? Nintendo have used that similar mechanic now in about 3 different games.
They have. I will say I do like its use here, because I'm always a bit hesitant when I see that. It was the same with Mario Wonder with the elephant. I know it's not quite the same, but when I first saw that power up, I was like, oh, that's just a gimmick, you know? But here, I really did like it. Like, there's a part where you suck in like a race car, and then just during one level you take part in a race. Well, not a race, but like a time trial. And honestly, like, I played this one level the whole time we were at the beach, and not because I was dying I was enjoying this race so much I kept retrying to try and get the gold. It's just, you know, like a silly little part of a level that really was actually quite good. Could have been its own game really, with a bit of refining. And apart from just those big power-ups, you have, as I said, your standard ones. But again, you can level them up. So you'll find scrolls as you go along, and you need like the coins, you know, the in-game currency that you find is these little shards of stars, I think, and you use those to enhance the weapons that Kirby's already or always had, the ones that you get by inhaling the enemies in games, you know?
So when you say enhance, are you talking about like points into a skill tree, or are you talking about just literally modifying those weapons?
Yeah, you modify them. So you go to a shop within, there's like a hub world, and you go to the shop and it will show you the ones that can be upgraded. And so, for example, the sword that you normally have that would act in its original form, very much like your basic, say, Link in a Zelda game, becomes this big, huge, like Monster Hunter style grey sword, and you use that instead. It doesn't add a massive amount to the game. I mean, it makes you that bit stronger. But what it does do with these powers is that there are little trials that you can go into, and that's how you get the shards I mentioned earlier. And they're like, again, time trials. So you'll have to cut all the ropes with the sword to get down to the final level, or you'll have to defeat a certain amount of enemies. If you just finish the level, you get the shards, but then there's like a gold time to aim for. And it's just these little things that have kept me playing, going back to try those.
I don't know if it's a long game and things like that, and does it have multiplayer? Those are the things I was wondering about.
It does have multiplayer, now you mention it. So I haven't tried it, obviously, but the fact it's in there, as long as it's not one of those like Nintendo-isms where you just player 2, I don't know, holds the Switch for the first player or goes to get him a cup of tea. No, as long as it's actual multiplayer mode, it would be good. I think I might prefer this to Mario Odyssey as a 3D platformer. They're very different, and there is certainly a lot more, not polished necessarily, but you can tell with Mario 3D, Nintendo obviously nailed it. I know this is how laboratories, I think, actually developed this. But just in terms of charm and how different it is in some ways, and even the levels, you know, like you end up in a theme park or fun fair at some point and you're on a ghost train, and I quite enjoy it. I think more than Mario Odyssey.
Nice, and I think it's a bit cheaper, isn't it?
No. I'm not sure, because Nintendo games, obviously it's published by Nintendo, so they seem to keep the value anyway. And the funny thing about ones like Kirby is that you'll see that just after launch you'll have a drop, but then they start to go up in price, where I guess they didn't make as many copies of that particular game. Another one like that is Yoshi, you know, is it Woolly World or whatever the Yoshi game is called on Switch? That's now about 45-50 quid if you can find it.
Alright, okay, let's talk about Doom and Doom 2, which was recently released on the Nintendo Switch in a brand new version, in a very strange way. I think we're kind of past Shadow Drop territory being that useful for anyone, you know, because there isn't quite the same buzz around the eShop, so you don't have people checking it, and things like this can go completely unnoticed, especially when we already have Doom 1 and 2, and then they re-release that as a bundle, and to the layman, you look at it and think, oh, it's the same game. But actually, it's a completely different version, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So it has like a new level, doesn't it? Or new series of levels that was created, I think it was last year, was it 2023? And it has a number of other different like level packs that have been added over the years, as well as obviously the Doom 1 and Doom 2. So what do you have to do to get this? So as long as you own, was it both of them, I guess?
Yeah, if you own both games, then you can go online and just download this free of charge. But on top of the new levels and new content, which is a big deal really, considering the game's like, what, 30 plus years old?
It's early 90s, isn't it? Must be, yeah, jeez.
Which really upsets me. So yeah, it's a big deal to finally have new content after all this time. But it's actually a completely different engine that it's running in. It runs on Nightdive's Kex engine, which we've seen in Turok and a few other games. So actually, when you're playing it, it feels quite different because it's that full 3D. And the field of view is quite large, so it feels quite stretched. You know, it does actually play quite differently to classic Doom, that some people may like and some may not. Now obviously I think they do have an option for flitting back to the old version, so that's good. Or at least I hope they do. You'll have to let me know in the comments. That's not something I checked.
Yeah, I mean, I do take your point that it does feel different to the classic, but at the same time, as soon as you get into it, that, you know, that familiar feeling, if you ever played Doom, comes straight back. I love, you know, how smooth it is at 60 frames, and something I've always loved about Doom, but I forget I love it until I go back and play Doom, is the fact you don't have to aim your gun, like move up and down. You know what I mean? You just point and shoot, and that's enough. I wish games did that still.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That whole not having to do like the Y-axis up and down.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore, but actually it does make it very easy, doesn't it? To just look in the direction and let the computer do the rest.
Yeah, because obviously Doom is so difficult, if you'd had to have done that as well, it would have, for me at least, it felt like such a chore that I mean, it was, I don't know if it was due to limitations back then, I just can't remember, to be honest with you, but it works so well still to this day because you can just focus on survival when you're getting shot from every which way without having to worry about precision aiming. But you still have to be, you know, relatively precise in terms of lining up your shots and just being aware of what's about you as well. When you've got enemies like in windows, which we had at some point, do you remember? Like pretty much in every window in this area we were in, and you're getting sniped at. And at first you don't know where it's coming from, but when you do know, as long as you're looking the right way, you know, the bullets will find your foe. I just think it works, still to this day, I think it works so well.
Yeah, it really does. You made a couple of interesting points there. One of them, you were talking about the engine and like limitations. Yeah, I do think something about the way that they handled 3D then, a bit like you often mentioned where they had the faux 3D back in the day. Do you remember? And it was like an image that kind of wrapped around in that way.
Yeah.
They used something similar, not the same. It was, you know, it was the first 3D game, but it was like a mixture of sprites and things. There was a reason that they didn't do that, and then we saw it in Duke Nukem, and it was quite revolutionary there. You know, that had that like full 3D world. So yeah, I do think the engine had an effect on that. The performance as well. This does have a few dips. We did notice a couple of dips actually, because we played in split screen multiplayer. Not massive, but you know, you definitely notice. And the final thing that you said there is you're talking about the difficulty. Now I know for a fact there's people here who have played the first few levels of Doom that are thinking it's not that hard. The new levels are unbelievably difficult. They are targeted at like Doom veterans, and it is brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, the difficulty, as you say, you're not wrong. Like, yeah, you play the first couple of levels, and you kind of fly through them, don't you? And they're quite linear, and they're almost like corridors. It's just welcoming you into the game, isn't it? You know, even the old Doom was the same in that a few levels in it bears its hand, and it really shows how difficult it is. But I think Doom is almost timeless. Like this new release, playing it again, has just shown me how well that formula works. And it is, I do like first-person shooters. I know you mentioned things like gyro aiming and stuff, which for this day and age is essential and definitely has enhanced the genre. But when I play something like this again, I do think sometimes, man, let's just go back to not a simpler time, but just sometimes have an experience that is simple again. Just reminds you how much fun it can be.
Definitely. We got that Dusk game on Switch, and obviously that's full 3D. I would like to see a modern game that doesn't use the Y-axis. I think that'd be quite interesting.
I think it would. I think it would stand out because of it.
Definitely. All right, next up then. This is one that you were talking to me about, and I couldn't picture it in my head. It's called Dreadout 2.
Yeah, so this is the game I was playing on holiday for the most part, and the one that I brought to the beach and just couldn't see. It's a survival horror game. It's not surprising, I guess. But it's from a small Indonesian team who I think were called Digital Happiness, something like that.
Great.
Yeah. So obviously there's a Dreadout, and this is the sequel. I don't think the first Dreadout is on the Switch at least. It's a third-person survival horror game, and it does take inspiration from a lot of different places as far as I can see, in that you play as this young, schoolgirl. Obviously it references the first game, and there is the story so far that you can watch before you start, which was quite useful just to give you an idea. I bought the Japanese physical from PlayAsia, and I will say that when you first boot the game up, the menus are in Japanese, and you need to find your way to the settings and click English, and then it's fine after that. So it's just an initial couple of minutes of trying to find that English option. But you use a camera, so already I'm thinking Project Zero or Fatal Frame, where you're capturing the spirits of the ghosts that you encounter. But it works in two different ways. Sometimes you'll have the camera in front of you in that third person, and when you hold down Y, I believe it is, you'll flash, and that will stun the ghosts. Whereas other times you're allowed to go into a first person view where you're looking through the camera as if you were taking a photo, and you do just that, you take photos to damage the ghost. So it uses both, and it's not a choice like the game will decide when you do one or the other. But away from Project Zero, it reminded me of a few other horror games, or not just games actually, just films as well. It very much had like a Joe the Grudge feel to it in terms of its enemies and just the general story. It has elements of things like Outlast in it at times as well. And I'll tell you what I liked about it. I should say it's very janky, by the way. I'm talking as if, it's very janky. But I did enjoy it, that. I found it quite charming. But what I did really respect was the way that it picked up on the normal moments that you find in horror films, but you don't necessarily see in horror games. Like there's a moment where you're injured and you're taken to hospital. And another inspiration I felt was like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, where you weren't quite sure if you were in a dream or if you weren't. And you're in this hospital and your character falls asleep. And it's not done through cutscenes, like you can move the camera, you're sitting in the chair, you don't have control of your character, but it's not a cutscene at the same time. And like you can see the time moving on, and I'm kind of waiting like, is this just a loading screen? What's going on? And then the lights flicker out and flicker back on, and then everyone's disappeared and you're in this empty hospital. And you don't normally see things like that in games. It jumps from one set piece to the next, one action part. It had those quieter, those more tense moments in there as well. It didn't necessarily handle them fantastically well, but I appreciate their effort in showing those more mundane, in air quotes, parts that you find in horror films while it's setting up the next scare.
Yeah, what was the game with the artist wearing the mansion?
Layers of Fear.
Layers of Fear did that very well.
It did do that well, and again, that's another one I can see perhaps having an influence here in this game. It's one I couldn't recommend necessarily because you're paying money for a game, you want top quality product. But if you're someone that likes survival horror and you're willing to accept some flaws, I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. It's a nice throwback, which I think takes a lot of good stuff from other games and tries its best to show it. Like there's an open world section where you're just walking around Indonesia, a town in Indonesia, and you're talking to the locals, and you revisit it later when it's night time. And there's a really, it's just strange. It has a lot of strange ideas that don't all mesh, but I like the fact they went for it,
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds really interesting. I'm interested to actually, because I can't picture it still in my mind, see what this looks like.
Yeah, and it also has combat, where sometimes you have a knife or an axe or something, and that's, again, it's always clunky in third-person survival horror games where you're like swinging an axe. But again, it works well enough, and I like the fact they just kept changing up how you deal with each chapter. I think there were 7 chapters. I think they're called acts, not chapters. and there's a final boss, and then you have the end credits. And I finished it quite late one night, and I put the Switch down for a sec, thinking it was just the credit roll. And then there was another boss fight.
Oh wow!
You know, it threw another one at you. Yeah, decent little hidden game, not hidden gem, but hidden game that if you like what I'm saying and you're quite lax or liberal with a few flaws, you might find some fun in it.
A janky mess.
Wow, I mean, one man's mess is another man's tidy room.
That one. Alright, let's talk about the new Volgarr The Viking. We've got Volgarr The Viking 2. You've probably heard Glen and I speak about the first game, not in hushed whispers, but very fondly, because it was a very difficult side-scrolling action game, with some platforming in there as well, with a few different mechanics. One of them was you collected several power-ups so you could become stronger, but when you took a hit, you'd lose some of that. You could throw your spear into a wall and use that to jump on, and it was like one hit and you die, or go back to the start of the area. How have things moved on with this sequel?
Well, they've clearly tried to make it a bit more accessible. It mentions that in the blurb on the eShop, and I think you can have checkpoints now, whereas as you said in the original, it was each new area was its own checkpoint. Now you'll have a few within an area. It's still very difficult, don't get me wrong, they certainly haven't taken the challenge away. What they have done, which I never understand in games, is they've added like an invincible mode. Do you remember? You activated it, but you don't even know how.
Yeah, I've not necessarily got a problem with the mode. I've got a problem with the way it activated. We were just playing normally.
Yeah.
All of a sudden I turned green and was invincible, and all of the fun just disappeared.
Yeah.
Like if it was like a toggle hidden away in the menu, for someone that just wanted to play through, fine, whatever, I don't really care. But it activated during normal play.
Yeah, no, yeah, I should clarify, I don't have a problem with the mode, but I do have a problem with the fact it seems to be there instead of an easier mode. What's the point in that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Have it as well as, by all means, fill your boots, Sonny Jim. But don't have it instead of one. That makes no sense to me at all.
No, it's a shame as well because the core game does seem or feel quite refined. You know, the first game was very good. The platforming was solid. It's tough. You get sections where you're getting closed in from both sides and you're battling away. You can roll as well as, I think you could roll originally, but you can roll through enemies here. It's used a little bit more as a mechanic. And from that side, it actually seems really solid. There's just a couple of weird quirks. How about the rest of it? Do you enjoy the way it plays now?
I liked the, as with the first game, you did still have that feeling of wanting to try again. If you didn't have that, the game wouldn't work because it is so difficult. You will die, it will annoy you, but you will want to try again. There were a few bits that did frustrate me, and it wasn't dying necessarily, it was the way you died. And what I mean by that is that there was a section, if you remember, where there were a number of ropes and you had to obviously jump between them, but sometimes you were allowed to double jump across to the next rope and sometimes you weren't, and it seemed to depend on how far a distance there was. Now, I suppose logically I can see why that is. You know, if a rope is further away and it necessitates a double jump, fair enough. But if you're using one just to be sure, let's say there's an enemy in your path and you just want to make sure, but because the rope's so close, on your second jump you then fall through the rope, that makes no sense to me.
No, it doesn't. There's just a few odd decisions when in that game you need every mechanic to be 100% fair. So as soon as it doesn't feel that way, you just get a little frustrated. Now, in fairness to you, Glen, you did manage to kind of overcome that and then progress to the next stage. And 90% of it is skill-based, isn't it, boy? Just a couple of flaws.
Yeah, for sure. It is a good game. It is a good game, and it does evoke memories of that first one. And it's nice to see a second one. I just wish they'd have fleshed out the accessibility options a bit more to what they are. And just a few strange quirks like the rope jump thing. And as you say, when you have to go back a fair chunk after that. And I will say that when you go back, you'll fly through that part again, unless, and this happens a lot in games, I'm sure you'll agree, you get those frustration goggles where you start dying on bits you know you can do, just because you're losing concentration or focus, you know, and that can happen sometimes. But I didn't feel that too much in this game. I was quite happy to keep trying and trying to perfect certain sections. I just feel that being a sequel, I expected it to be a bit more refined in certain sections.
Definitely, yeah. Fans of the original, you're going to get quite a bit more of the same with a few little tweaks, as we've said. It doesn't have multiplayer, which we saw in Abathur, which came out recently, and I thought it was a nice addition there. But yeah, a good time. I'd say worth checking out if you found it on a sale. Which takes us on to a very unusual game that I think is part of a big series. It's called That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. You knew a bit about this one as I was playing it, and I didn't have a clue. And it was the most bizarre tale of I think it was a cat or dog that dies. A person that dies.
It's a man.
Right, a man dies.
Yep.
And then gets reincarnated as a slime. And then this slime then consumes things like dragons, starts their own town. I don't even know where to go from there, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a manga, I'm fairly sure, and an anime as well, I think. And I knew of its existence. That's about as far as my knowledge went. I did know you started as like a businessman, like an everyday man, boring life, that dies, as you say, and comes back as a slime in like an RPG, like the level 1 slime, the saddest of all the sad enemies. But yeah, then you I didn't know any of this bit, that's as much as I knew, but then in the cutscene for this game, you talk to this dragon and become friends with it. And then they agree between them that the best way forward is that the slime eats the dragon, so it consumes its power. We're mates. I don't think we'd ever have that discussion or the agreement that comes forthwith. But then he goes on a quest to eat more dragons and or fantastical beasts. Then becomes reincarnated as a child somehow. I'll be honest, it's probably my fault. I did skip the cutscene. We were a slime and then we were a child, and I didn't see how, so that's my bad. And then, as you say, you start a town up and everyone worships you as the main, I don't know, goddess, whatever.
The real kicker is, it's actually quite a good game. So you go out on these runs and you're fighting monsters from left to right. It's like real-time action. It feels in a weird way a little bit like either like a fighting game or like a Smash Brothers. And you're fighting different creatures using your special moves and stuff, and that's actually quite good, isn't it?
Yeah, it had a feel of something like Muramasa, where, as you say, where you're going left to right, but in the map you have like a square or rectangle, then a line, then the next rectangle, you're in the next area, and you start to map out where you've been, and you can go up onto the next screen at certain points on the screen as you play, and then you recruit people to come with you, and you're leveling up all the time, and you're putting points into certain skills. But with the combat, you have a few different special moves, some of which are time-based or energy-based, and you can call in other characters to assist you, which I suppose is where the fighting game part comes from, things like Marvel vs. Capcom where you had those assist characters. But it does work, it is good. It was quite fun to play. The combat was very satisfying. As when you start rolling and dodging and getting those hits in, it felt good.
Rolling and dodging? What are those?
It was weird actually, because I found it quite natural where you struggled with it a bit. I mean, it was late at night to be fair, but you're certainly, when it comes to games where you roll and dodge, you're the main man as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, I think it was very late. That's what I'm going to go with. But it's one of those where the rolling and dodging is a different setup for it entirely. So my brain would need to adapt, to that. Just for you, I think as a fighting game fan, you instantly picked it up and were like, I know what to do. And it's, it was fair play to you. But what was cool about this was it also tracks the way you win. So you had S rank for a lot of those fights and stuff like that, and you get more rewards from that. And then the mechanic where you swallow things started to come in at the end of our gameplay, where you could use that as one of your special moves on an enemy, and it seems to affect the rewards you then get. And I don't know how that plays into then the development of your village. But as I say, and as you say, it all works in a weird way, doesn't it?
Yeah. The combat system or the scoring system, I believe it was you started on, say, a C rank, and then the more hits you got in, your rank would increase up to a potential S rank or double S or whatever. But obviously if you take hits or your moves aren't quite as, not flashy, but fluent, it starts to go back down again, which you've seen in games before. But yeah, it did start to then affect your village, as you mentioned, and it started to fill out, and I'm assuming people will join and move in. But from the start, where it looked 100% like it was going to be a visual novel, didn't it? It became this side-on fighting game, which, it would be difficult to recommend just on the strength of being a fighting game, because there are others. You'd have to, I think, enjoy the series and want these specific characters to be fighting. But just as a game in and of itself, it was a lot of fun.
It really was. It was a bizarre experience, but a fun one.
Yeah, very good game.
The final game we're going to talk about then is one that instantly caught the eye on the eShop. It has a beautiful pixel art style where the characters are very zoomed out. I think the thumbnail has like this tree on it that just looks amazing. And having picked up pixel art myself for the little game I'm working on, it's not easy at all. So to get that level of quality is no easy thing. So it instantly caught my attention, and I think yours as well.
Yeah, very much so. I love that style, you know, the zoomed out pixel art. And it was one that I certainly had my eye on. And it's a game where you play as, or you start in like a small village and you get sent out. It's all about giving like a token to this tree, you know, an appreciation token for this tree to look after you almost. But it kind of starts to deviate, and obviously it goes further on as you play. You start as a young boy, and what's interesting is at times you'll be controlling directly and you'll move from screen to screen. You'll be given quests by villagers, and you can start to move towards these by way of following like a map icon, and you have an actual map as well that you can follow. But then when you get into combat, it changes to a top-down view and is a bit more, if not completely turn-based, it has a bit of real time about it, doesn't it? It's not completely turn-based.
Yeah, any movement that you make will cause the enemy to also time to pass for them. So you have to be really careful. If you move like 5 meters to the left, during that movement, they will make whichever moves they have coming next. There's an icon above their head. When it's red, it will show you what they're going to do. So if it's a gun symbol, they're going to shoot. Sometimes it's a reload in like an orange. So you have to really be careful. But with that said, although it gives you a few skills, and you can upgrade skills, like you get a dash move quite early on, it's too difficult to anticipate where they're going to be able to hit you. And sometimes actually it's not even anticipating, it's you literally cannot avoid an attack, which is a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. So your skills will go on cooldown between moves. So you can move every turn, just a standard walk move. But then, as you say, you've got like a dash or an attack, but they'll be on a cooldown, so you can use those every other move. So sometimes you'll get yourself in a position where the only move you have available is that walk. And because as you move, they will then move too, they can still catch you. Or if they shoot a bullet, as you're moving, the bullet is still moving in slow motion to represent the time passing, and you can't avoid it. Now, you can argue that that's down to your decisions, and I'm not saying that isn't the case, but to be that difficult that early in a new mechanic where you're trying to pick it up still does lead to some frustrating moments.
Yeah, it really does. It's a difficult one because, like you say, I think you could eventually work out a way to win, but that wouldn't necessarily mean that the design was right. You know, you're having to essentially work around what is a slightly flawed implementation of a very good idea.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You win in spite of the mechanics, not because of the mechanics. At times, you know, it may well improve as you get more skills. And it also does the thing that I don't personally like, I must say, where it sets you up in situations early on where you can't win. You're meant to escape, or sometimes you're just meant to die. But you'll take a while realizing that. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're talking, I mean, there's a long tutorial, but if we take that out of the way, in terms of actual playing the game, we're talking quite early on. And with so many options these days, you could quite conceivably think, oh, you know, bugger this, so I'm going to play something else, and miss out on what could potentially be quite a good game once those mechanics click.
Yeah, I do think, like you say, exactly as you say there, I think there is going to be a click point with this one. And I think potentially
You know, my advice for what it's worth would be to shorten the tutorial, which we haven't touched on majorly. It's too long, it's too arbitrary, it's not enjoyable. There are better ways of introducing your mechanics, and just to cut down on the almost like set piece battles, just tone that down a bit so that your mechanics have time to breathe and to shine earlier in the game than they probably do.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe slow down the speed of things like some of the bullets slightly to make dodging them a little bit easier. But as we say, there is something in here for sure. Perhaps we'll push further in and, you know, see where we get to.
Yeah, it'd be nice to mention this one again in one of these episodes when we're a bit further on. These are early impressions, but I do think it's a game that's worth playing a bit more of and giving further impressions later on in the game.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening. That was 6 interesting games that we've been playing at the moment. Let us know your ones in the comments. Do save yourself some money on your eShop credit using no codes at all. Just go into switchup.gg, buying games, eShop credit, whatever it is you want to buy, and we get a small kickback from Nintendo and you get 5% in cash back.
Yep, just once again, apologies if the audio is not up to the usual standard. As we did mention, we are away for Gamescom and doing this in a hotel. We've had some technical issues, if it's fair to say. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.